In this video, we're going to look at good and bad examples of providing evidence from sources. And as we said in the earlier part of this video, you need to provide evidence by using a quote, a number, or a specific example. So that's what we're going to be looking for in these examples. Is each writer providing a quote, a number, or a specific example for each of their claims? So the example here is the topic, should Medicare coverage be extended to all Americans? And here is the thesis, and it's a good thesis for an argument rebuttal essay. And it says medical coverage should be expanded to include all Americans. That's the stance, because this coverage would ensure that all Americans receive access to health care, reduce costs for employers, and make it easier for workers to move into better jobs, which are the reasons. And these all deal with the last one, which is making it easier for workers to move into better jobs. So each of these paragraphs is trying to argue that expanding Medicare would make it easier for people to move into better jobs. All right. So let's read each one of these. Pause the video to read it. Decide if you think it's doing a good job of providing evidence by giving a quote, a number, or a specific example, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, let's pause the video and read A. Okay, coming back, A is not a good example of providing evidence. The only thing in the way of quote, number, specific example it has is this quote. But if you'll notice, they don't really say who the expert is. There's no credentials. But more importantly, all the quote does is just repeat the claim that the writer of the essay is making. It's not giving any analysis or explanation or other evidence. It's sort of just one of these uses of quotes that says, yep, here's someone who agrees with me. Well, that's not going to persuade people because it doesn't show us why or how Medicare would prevent employees from having to stay in bad jobs, right? It just echoes that. So that is not a good quote. And it's really the only thing in this whole paragraph that it could be considered a quote, a number, or a specific example. Now, a lot of times people think they have an example that's specific, but it's really just generic. And that's what we also see here. It says, for example, a mother might, and this is just a hypothetical mother. It's not a real person with a name. It's not a specific example. It's just like, let's imagine this person together. And this whole rest of this essay, of this paragraph from the essay, is just based on this generic person. There's nothing cited from a source. There's no specific evidence. It's just a hypothetical person. So this paragraph really doesn't have much, if any, real evidence from sources. All right. So let's move up now and take a look at example B. So pause the video, read it, decide if you think it's providing evidence from sources, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, this paragraph also does not do a good job of providing evidence from sources. This is an example of somebody who just wanted to put down what they could easily find. So what they could easily find was this big paragraph here about the history of why healthcare benefits are provided by employers in the US. And they just have a great big quote about that as though to make up for the fact that they don't have any other evidence. But, you know, the background or history of why employers provide healthcare just really isn't very relevant at all to whether expanding Medicare would help people switch jobs, right? So they're not giving evidence for the key claims. And then the rest of the paragraph, there's just no evidence. It's just everyone could do this and that. And, you know, a lot of times people will say to me who write like this, do I have to provide evidence if I don't need it? And of course, you always need evidence. But what they're really saying is, well, I can explain this clearly and logically without evidence. And that's good. But in addition to explaining, you have to support it with a quote, a number, or a specific example for each claim. So really, this is just sort of someone laying out their case, sort of elaborating on their claim, but they haven't provided any evidence, and the one piece of so-called evidence they have is not relevant. All right, let's look at C next. So pause the video, read that, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, on the surface, this might appear to do a better job of providing evidence, but it really isn't doing that great a job, because even though it has a lot of citations and parentheses after sentences, it doesn't bring in anything specific from the source, right? I mean, the closest this comes is just quoting this title of a concept, but there's never any quote from an expert that's giving any analysis of why the claim is true. There are no numbers in here. There are no specific examples other than the mother, but then look what happens, right? The example is so underdeveloped, right? It says, one example of this is a friend of my mother's who had this problem. She wanted to leave her job, but she couldn't because she needed the benefits. So there's no specificity there. So that I would not count as a true specific example. It's general, there's nothing, no detail there. So you get a lot of sentences where there's kind of a claim with a citation from a source there, but you don't know what in that sentence comes from the source, right? So you need a quote, a number, or a specific example, and this just doesn't have that. So it's also not doing a good job of providing evidence from its sources. All right, let's lastly look at D. Pause the video, take a minute to read through it, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, D does do a good job of providing evidence from sources because every claim in it is supported by either a quote, a number, or a specific example. So I'm just going to start kind of marking these out so you can see it. So we've got our main claim, right? Medicare would make it easier for workers to move into better jobs. And then it says currently some people experience job lock, which is a nice little bit of context to set up the first piece of evidence, which is a quote from an expert. So I'm going to put that, I'm just going to choose some colors here. Let's put the quote from the experts in green. So that is a specific quote, and it's a quote that doesn't just say, yes, I agree that Medicare would make it easier for workers to move into better jobs. It explains why job lock keeps people in jobs they don't want, right? And they also do a nice job of giving some analysis after that to sort of explain how the evidence ties into their claim. All right, then we get a specific example, right? And there's a little setup sentence that gets us ready for that. And then we have the specific example here. And I'm going to put the specific examples maybe in blue. And the specific example is this woman named Sarah Hefner. And it talks specifically about what happened, right? It isn't just a general statement, oh, she had this problem. And it provides a quote, so as you can see, sometimes you use quotes for the examples as well. But there's a specific example here, right? She wanted to take this great job as an interior decorator, and she couldn't do it because she had to stay in the accounting job because it provided benefits for her husband and children that the new job didn't, right? And then we get a little sentence that sets up the next example. And then here we get a number, and I'll put the number in purple, right? And it shows that between 20 and 40% of American workers have experienced job lock at least once in their career, citing the source for that, right? And the sources are cited for all of these, of course. Okay, and so we have a nice pattern of consistently supporting the claim with a quote, a number, or a specific example. The number's a percentage here. And we see the same thing in the second paragraph, which is really just a continuation of it, right? So we've got here a quote from an expert, the Prime Minister of the UK, who certainly knows about his country's healthcare. So that would be quote from an expert. Then we have a number here showing that people in the UK who have national health care are much more able to change jobs, they're 50% more likely. Then we've got right here another quote from an expert. So I think I was putting that in green, right? And so that way you can see there's a pattern of consistently putting in specific evidence here. Quotes, numbers, specific examples in order to support the claims. And you know it's consistently supporting the claims. It's not just picking one or two that it's easy to support, it's consistently doing it. So when you're using your sources and you want to provide evidence from them in your essays, you want to make sure that each claim has a quote, number, or specific example to support it.